And now, the DPP Rally Talk Show with Claudia on the CAW360 Network. And here's your host, Claudia Merandi.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to DPP Rally Talk Show with Claudia. I'm Claudia Merandi. As a reminder, we protest again October 16, 2019. This will be round 5 for the Don't Punish Pain Rally organization. If you'd like to call in to tonight's show, the phone number is 415-403-2715. Tonight, we welcome Attorney John Flannery. John is a former federal prosecutor from New York City. He's listed in Who's Who in America. He's been a guest commentator on CNN, Fox, O'Reilly Factor. And John is representing doctors throughout the country who have been targeted unfairly for prescribing pain medication. John Flannery, welcome to the guest. Welcome to the show, I should say. How are you?
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
So, John, in a nutshell, I've got one question for you. What the hell is going on in this country?
Well, you know, Jeff, it's pretty terrible. But, you know, in the general sense, when people ask me, how can you represent someone, the notion being that as a defense counsel, you should pick and choose. And we do to some extent. But you can today represent people because the government will overcharge them and want some disproportionate punishment for what they did. In this case, that is doctors and patients, it's compounded by the fact the government doesn't care what the truth is and believes because some people do die from overdoses and bad prescriptions and things like that, that the entire nation of chronic pain patients who suffer pain relentlessly their entire life should not be treated for it, should not have the pain medication they need so day to day they can be human beings and get on with their life. And there are estimates that this public health challenge costs America $500 billion in medical costs, disability programs, and lost productivity. And when we lose anybody, and we lose about, I believe the numbers from NIH and CDC were something like 20,000 people may die from some prescriptions. But when we have, you know, so many more Americans who 40 million, 50 million, depending on the number that you get, who have chronic pain, you have to be much more nuanced in how you prosecute doctors who deal rather than heal. And in my experience, most of the doctors out there, they're out there to heal a patient, to do the best they can, to move them on so that they are healthy.
And as a reminder for our listeners, for our viewers, John authored a book, Pain in America, and it's on sale right now. Amazon. Every doctor that I speak with, John, they know your name, they know your book. Is business booming right now because every day there's a new doctor that I go to my email and it's a doctor. You know, am I the only doctor having problems? Do you know attorneys that can help me? How incredibly busy are you with this particular issue?
Well, I have several clients involving this question, but what we observe is, and what my book says, is that pain in America, but the rest of it is in how our government makes it worse. And it makes it worse because it says everybody who's taking a pain medication is an addict, and that is not the case. And there's a variety of estimates as to how many may become addicts as a result of taking pain medication. And the question is, how do you help a person who may become an addict who still has pain? That's the toughest question. And the estimates are, from 1% to 2% to 4%. So we should be talking about what the real problem is and the extent of it. But the politicians are mind-numbing in their exaggerations so that they can, I guess, get reelected and do things like that. And I don't mean to minimize how we have to deal with those difficult cases, but we have these addictionologists out there, and for them, it's like for a hammer, everything's a nail. So every person who's taking any medication at all, they believe is an addict rather than dependent on it for the need that they have medically. So there are a lot of doctors out there who have problems, and there are a lot of lawyers who don't know how to handle these problems. And then there are some outstanding lawyers, like there are in every profession, who drill down, pay attention to the case, and the most important thing they do is prepare the case, actually make what's happened to an individual part of their corpuscular structure so that they can know enough to actually defend an individual innocent doctor who has been trying to help patients, not trying to support some sort of addiction or recreational use.
You know, it's not only the politicians that have created, you know, I refer to it as opioid hysteria, but the media sensationalizes, you know, when the DEA raids a doctor, the media sensationalizes these cases. This doctor has 592 counts. I think it was Dr. Joel Smithers. I had his wife on.
Right.
I think she's just had her 5th baby a few days, or maybe she's still, you know, awaiting. And I said, how did they come to the conclusion of these astronomical 500 counts when
right?
How do they, you know,
every prescription he wrote for a number of patients was treated as a separate criminal count, which is ridiculous. They're saying that for, just take, say, one of the patients, they're saying that there was no prescription written in any case, in any instant, that was justifiable and necessary as a medical need for that patient. That's astonishing. But what I do understand something about that case, and one of the problems with that case is apparently the lawyer wasn't prepared, and right up until the day of the trial, the patient, the doctor in the case, asked for the lawyer to be removed, and the judge wouldn't do it. And during the trial, asked several times to have his lawyer removed because he wasn't able to represent him. And the judge helped the prosecution, according to what I understand, at several times frame questions to help the prosecution's case. I don't know if it's a railroad because I haven't read the transcript, but this bias, if you will, in the system that any doctor who comes in who gives any pain medication is a function of irresponsible journalism, irresponsible prosecutors, irresponsible candidates for office. Cory Booker, whom I might like, I heard him say in the debates that we should go after all these people that are actually producing this pharmacology and helping people who are in pain. Well, you know, that's just one side of it. And I'm not saying there isn't a problem, but you know, there's a Vanity Fair article this up right now, and it's very interesting to read the interview to see how in between every answer the person gives, they're saying, oh yeah, but he didn't know this and he didn't say that. I'm sure he regrets giving the interview at all, but it was Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family. So are they pushing it too hard? Are they being ridiculous and so on and so forth? That seems to be somewhat beyond the point. If you're prescribing medicine to an individual and they need it and it works and you monitor it, you see what problems they have and they get better, or they have to sustain some level of medication, that's very different than being recreational or just giving drugs to somebody who wants to use them to escape whatever the world, society, etc.
So, John, I have a question for you. You know, a lot of the doctors that I speak with believes that their medical boards have tipped off the DEA, which leads to these really horrifying raids where doctors and patients are held at gunpoint. I mean, it's rogue.
Well, they are literally held at gunpoint when they do these searches. They come in, you know, like a wolf on the fold. Their cohorts shining in purple and gold, to borrow from some poetry. And they terrorize everybody. You know, we're talking about civilians, and they're applying the kind of tactics they use with a drug violator who has guns and weapons to a professional physician and his or her staff. And they terrorize them, and then they question them, and then they take all their records away, and they thumb through this ransacking to find instances that they believe show that they didn't follow normal medical practices and how they dealt with their patients. And then that becomes the standard by which they say, see, they're drug dealers because we don't like the way they do their medicine. But I think the only intent that matters is, did you give the drugs to a person who didn't need them at all? Did you intend to deal? Were you getting paid, what, the minimal amount for a visit to give somebody a bogus prescription? That's the question. That should be the only question in these doctor cases, but it's not.
I testified recently, and I said, while ironically, the head of my Department of Health, or one of the minions, also sits on the medical board, and I said, the bottom line is you terrorize doctors. And he said, I think terrorize is a strong word. I said, how do you think terrorize is a strong word when you've got this software where you can find out exactly how many pills Dr. A is prescribing compared to Dr. B on the next corner? And it's almost like the medical board is pitting doctor against doctor. And it just leads to...
yeah, they are. And one of the things you point out that I failed to mention when you asked, how are they deciding to come down on these people, is they look at the prescriptions which are reported according to doctor, and they look at the person with the highest number of prescriptions, and then they target them. And they may send in agents to pretend to have back pain, which you can't confirm by, any kind of imaging technique. And so you have to rely on a person and watch how they move and see if they had physical injuries that may account for the pain that they claim to have. And so then they go after these people, and they keep going after them. And if they have anything else in their history, they're having a relationship with a patient, they had a drug problem themselves, they're usually older, they may be foreign born. They look for these things to make them weaker defendants in the courtroom. Mm-hmm. And I know this because I've represented several people, and they're either minorities or they're foreign born, and they're usually older, and they're in a practice in an area where people are using their bodies in their 50s and 60s, when other people who work at a desk are not kind of suffering the kind of pain they have, and they can't afford medicine, or there isn't a medical treatment to take care of their pain. And these are, so you have a combination of the demography of where a doctor is and what legitimate pain people have, and the government just assumes that nobody could use this kind of pain medication. Well, these people, if they don't have that pain medication, they often commit suicide, and that's understandable. There's no escape from the pain, and if they can't get pain medication, they're undertreated by doctors, then that's what happens to them.
So doctors they're being profiled. If you prescribe opioids, being profiled, and I know in some states you receive accolades for extracting 4 teeth without opioids. And then there's this poor doctor that's trying to, care for his ailing patient, and it's just it's insanity.
You hit. Let me give you a really good example of this. I have Irish teeth. I don't know if that's true or not, but they seem to have had some problems. And I had to have an extraction, and they gave me a mild oxycodone prescription afterwards. And I know from experience, if you don't take it before the pain comes on, the pain is double. And I happened to be talking to a prosecutor in Florida, and I mentioned this to her, and she said, we should know who that doctor is, the dentist, or actually it wasn't a dentist, it's some highfalutin title. And, and I said, you're being ridiculous. I mean, you must be so young and have such great teeth, you have no idea what I'm talking about. And it's this kind of ignorance that was dealt with in the Gonzales Supreme Court case, which was that we shouldn't have lay people, we shouldn't have in the Department of Justice supplanting their opinions about a medical question that doctors make. And we shouldn't have government agencies saying what we think is a good standard prescription when the prescriptions that they're giving are right to the person who's sitting there in their office, the patient. And compromising and dictating to doctors how to conduct their business in a professional sense is just wrong. The funny thing, or in an odd sense, is that the Supreme Court, despite that decision in the Gonzalez case, didn't apply it in these pain cases. So you have sensible, common sense opinions by a Supreme Court about how to decide these cases, and then you don't follow it. And opioids are considered to be dangerous enough that they're a Schedule II substance in the sense that they have to be handled carefully. And who better to handle it than trained physicians, doctors, not government people who are afraid of pain medication, afraid of addiction, and don't give a hoot about whether or not a person's pain is being relieved. And doctors saying, well, I'll prescribe pain down to 3 or 4 or 5, whereas maybe they should be prescribing it to 7, 8, 9, and that matters over time, that you're not giving adequate treatment to an individual.
So I'm going to ask you a question, because I know everybody that's listening that will listen throughout the night. From a pain patient's perspective, John, this question is probably on my thread all day, all night. Do pain patients have a class action lawsuit against the CDC?
Well, here's the problem. Governments are sovereigns. These are hangovers from our so-called declared independence of George III. And so they enjoy certain sovereign rights, immunity from certain kinds of lawsuits. And I've always thought that the way to bring these lawsuits are to challenge the exercise of the immunity beyond, because it defies constitutional rights and liberties, beyond what they're doing. So, for example, if you have a policy that results in the undertreatment of all citizens in America and thereby denying a person's life and liberty be treated, that should be a cause of action. Now, the theoretical ideas of using, say, the 42 U.S.C. 1983, the Civil Rights Act, for something like this, run up against an America that believes that this is a righteous policing and that the CDC couldn't be doing anything wrong if they believe that we should be chasing the devil opioid. And I don't even think these people understand that we have low-level means within our own bodies to deal with pain, acute pain. You heard something, and acute pain being a couple of days. But don't understand that a chronic pain is relentless and goes on forever. And you've talked to, no doubt, doctors and patients, and yourself had some pain challenges yourself. People that don't have it don't seem to understand it, and don't seem to understand why this is necessary. I also think there are individuals in the system who don't have immunity. That is to say, some of these experts who push forward cases that are unjustified in various ways, and I think they should be held responsible. Once they testify, however, they enjoy certain kinds of immunity. And it seems to me that's two of the angles. And I was on the Hill in the Judiciary Committee a week or so ago talking about some other matters, but we did then talk about my concern about a law that criminalizes patients and criminalizes a profession to heal that has nothing to do with traditional narcotics cases. And, I got lip service, and I have testified on the Hill, and you've run programs up on the Hill, and you see what the barriers are. It's like a third rail for politicians to be for anything except get the SOBs and put them in jail, and we don't care what the facts are. And America has never handled drugs well. I was a federal prosecutor prosecuting huge drug cases involving heroin and it being imported from various nations and so forth. And the demand in America for that kind of drug has been enormous. And it seems to me that the government should be focusing on these illegal importations rather than messing around with these doctors the way they do. And I think one of the reasons they'd rather go after a doctor is he's not going to pull out a pistola and shoot the agent. And so it's safe. And these are fragile defendants, and they make a political point every time they get some ridiculous sentence, 60, 70 years, holding them accountable for deaths that are coincidences. So if there's an overall problem, I would say that justice is a coincidence of the system, not a consequence of it.
So Beverly asked this question on YouTube: why does the government care so much about addicts and not pain patients when we're both human? Why is the addictions community receiving almost accolades?
I think to win these cases, the government originally sold themselves on the theory that we can beat every case if we can make the issue about addiction rather than make it about pain. And so any good advocate has to explain to a court and to a jury that pain is what it's really about. And these addictionologists come in, and that's all they can talk about. And they usually have very little experience with pain and pain medication. I had a case in which a doctor was saying the government expert was saying what kind of pain medication someone should get, and it was contradictory of what Medicaid said was permissible. So this is one of the problems you have. And a lazy lawyer who doesn't find out these facts is unable to represent their client. And another thing that I see that they do at trials is they bring in, quote, similar acts of other things the person has done. And I had a case a conviction thrown out with 25 years in Ohio based on these similar acts. And then the person did have a weapon in the doctor's office for late hours in case anything happened, never been used, and they thought they could put that in. And the defendant was black. And so the combination was to suggest that he had the gun there because this is a drug trade, and that these other acts that didn't have anything to do with the case they charged all showed him to be a bad person. And they convicted him, and they sentenced him to 25 years. And in a couple of days, I didn't come into the case until after he was convicted, and I made a motion to have him released on bail, and I got him out. And then I challenged the entire conviction, and I got the conviction thrown out. And so he never went back to jail again. He'd been convicted. And I can't say that these results you get in every case, but you look for the overreach of the government. You look for the violations they have. But prosecutors who've made up stuff, they walk free. It's amazing. They make up evidence, they ignore evidence, they do things, and the courts don't do anything about it, so they sort of encourage them to go on. I mean, we've seen it in some sensational public cases, including the recent resignation of the labor secretary just days ago. They do these things that are outrageous, and rarely do they get caught up on it. And that happens in the doctor's cases, it happens in other cases.
I was a court reporter for the feds for quite some time, and I would be astonished at the judge's ruling. And my mouth would drop. And I would sometimes wonder, is this judge in cahoots with this prosecutor, or what the hell just happened in this courtroom? We're going to take in a caller, area code 734. Hi, caller.
Hi, Claudia.
Hi there. How are you?
I'm hanging in. How are you?
Good. What's your question?
I'm good. Well, I just wanted to ask, since I tuned in a little late today, so I'm not sure if you guys hit this subject, but there is a law, I believe it's Title 42 U.S. Code 1395, prohibition against any federal interference. Why are the DEA allowed to interfere in our medical issues?
Well, because there's a difference between what the law says and what people do. This nation has suffered a lawlessness unprecedented in my lifetime in the recent years. And if the government wants to do something, increasingly, because they're not opposed sufficiently or aggressively enough, they get away with it. It seems to me that in these drug cases, there are a series of violations against individual rights and liberties, and including the massive searches they have under with guns, and then they treat it not as custody when they take a doctor and throw him in a room and tell him that he has to talk to them when he doesn't have to. And so we have a very serious problem, and it's not just with doctors; it's across the board. Our criminal justice system, when the Department of Justice is involved, is that it is the just us system. They do what they can get away with. They defy state rules as to what ethical behavior they should follow. They use statutes in a way that I don't think are supportable. They look for the least possible evidence they need to prove a doctor should go to prison or that they should be able to stop a person from getting prescriptions. I had a case in Florida in which the patient was Richard Pay, and I hadn't handled any of his trials. He had been convicted and sentenced to 25 years for pain medication he received. And I made the argument before a 3-judge panel that it was unconstitutional to prosecute a person for the fact that he was ill, meaning that he had pain and received these prescriptions. And his conviction was based on the fact that they claimed the doctor issued illegal prescriptions, which had nothing to do with him. And they convicted him on instructions of that nature. And I got one of the 3 judges to agree with me, but I decided the entire court system was not going to follow the law. And so I made a clemency petition to the governor of the state, and his cabinet voted unanimously to release him immediately because while in custody, Richard was receiving in 2 days an opium pump that far exceeded the drug that he was receiving that they claimed was illegal possession. And so and that there were enough of these pills that they claimed that then they could presume it was for trafficking, when not a single pill that they ever found in his house hadn't been used by him personally, and he'd been tailed for it. So there's enormous injustice in our system, and there's no exception to that rule when it comes to the prosecution of doctors and patients who have pain medication they need.
And I think what people don't realize is a lot of our jurors, when they're handed jury instructions, some of our jurors have an 8th grade education. And, I was in the system for years and I couldn't understand jury instructions. But, when I spoke with Dr. Smithers' wife and she was telling me about the jury, my heart sunk. I said, oh God, this poor man, God only knows what is, it's just one horrible story after the next, John. They roll in all day, all night, doctors, pain patients. We're going to bring in another caller. Hi, caller, area code 404. What's your question for Attorney John Flannery?
Hi, John. Hi, Claudia.
Hi, Mark. Dr.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I get the impression every time that we share what's going on in this crisis with our doctors, they either don't trust us, what we say, or they don't want to rock the boat to bring any attention to the med boards or the DEA. What can we do as chronic patients? What can we say to our doctors?
Well, one of the chapters in my book, and I'm not here to hawk it, but I was in my office one day, and a fellow I know comes in, and he tells me that he wants to talk to me. And what he wanted to talk to me about was that he had hurt his shoulder, and he'd had some surgery done. And after that, he was in enormous pain, and that when he went to doctors, they were very anxious that he was just, seeking meds for pleasure. And one day, when he went to cut the turkey, tears came to his eyes because he couldn't exercise the force on cutting the family bird at Thanksgiving. And after that, what he did was he kept together all his records of the doctors he saw. And because some doctors want to treat it and others are afraid of prosecution, in the latter case, those doctors look for all sorts of alternative ways to recommend to patients because they don't want to be on that list of doctors who prescribe medication and end up in the top 5 in the state. I think what you have to do is you have to write the medical boards and you have to write the medical associations, although in their medical tutorials that they're giving, they're discouraging doctors from giving opioids and pain medication, exactly because the DEA leans hard on investigating and prosecuting any use of opioids. And if they look for other ways to prosecute people, that they're they're spending government-insured services, and they're fraudulent services. So if they can't get them on a drug case, they try to get them on some sort of accounting practice case involving funds from Medicare or Medicaid.
Oh, all of my doctor's cases stem from, and I put in quotes, Medicare fraud. I've got
Right.
a Dr. McDonald in my neck of the woods. He's on my Rhode Island Department of Health, and he says, "Oh, Claudia, that doctor, he violated a lot of Medicare." I said, "Oh, please, enough. You're either performing too many urine screens or not enough urine screens, or you've got to worry about the doctor up the street ratting you out, or you have to worry about the DEA planting somebody in your office." There's no sanctity anymore between the provider and the patient relationship. Somebody has a question. What's the outcome, John? When is
Well, I mean, it goes across the board. I was before a judge, again, it was in Florida, and the judge is trying to interfere with the motion I made by asking my client if she, the doctor, agreed with my strategy. And I told the judge, "You do not talk to my client in court. You talk to me." And the judge said in open court, "Are you trying to pull my chain?" And I thought, well, I'm never going to get a fair hearing from this judge. And so I moved to get rid of him, and I got rid of him. And now the trouble is, I went through 3 other judges before I got a 4th judge who actually heard the case, and ultimately we got the case dismissed because we had a fair judge. And one of the reasons that we convinced the judge was I demanded a hearing on the tape recordings they had for the undercover agents. And I said I was going to exclude them if we couldn't hear them. Well, they went out and had an engineer improve the hearing. And when you improve the hearing, you could hear my client, the doctor, saying, "No, that would be wrong. You shouldn't do that. You can't do that. No, I can't authorize that. Don't do that." And that's when we got the case thrown out. So you have to have a resolve, and you have to fight it, and you have to fight it every inch of the way, and you have to educate doctors and patients as to what their rights are to keep their mouths shut and to force the government to show their hand. And they do a lot of bluffing, and then they don't have to bluff so much because they're dealing with people who are terrified they're going to become addicted or the loved one is, and they don't know about pain because maybe it hasn't happened to them. And if it happens to a family member, they think the doctor is mistreating them, and that's where some of the complaints come from. So the ignorance is rife, and the government is hurting us by spreading this ignorance without any nuance as to what it means to the chronic pain patients and even the acute pain patients across America.
John, I tell everybody, every person I come across, whether it's anybody, educate. In a perfect world, all of our federal court judges could have severe spinal stenosis, and then maybe they could have some empathy for the undertreated nation that we're living in, or 10 senators could come forward whose loved one is struggling with cancer and they're begging for pain medication. They're playing, let's make a deal. We have a lot of questions coming in. Beverly Diaz out of Texas wants to know your opinion about the Purdue or the Johnson & Johnson trial in Oklahoma. As we all know, Andrew Claudia testified as an expert. What are your feelings on this trial? I think it wraps up on Monday.
I've always been upset about how these cases go and are settled. Beverly, I don't know how exactly they intend to prove that they were pushing these drugs, which is the claim. And like I said earlier, Vanity Fair had an issue in which they interviewed a member of the Sackler family, and he was discussing how they went with the information they had at each iteration of the drugs they released, and then tried to make amendments and got praised for the amendments they made to their practices to redress what government was telling them they needed to redress, and now they're being prosecuted for what they had previously been complimented about. So I'd have to. It would be guessing for me to say what the government's case is and how fallacious it is, or if it is fallacious. Greed does have a way of changing people. It's sort of like, they talk about power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and greed can replace a well-intentioned corporate reason to help people in pain. And I can't say on the spectrum where they are in that case now. I would defer to experts who've studied the material and say whether the case is excessive or not. But again, if I had to squint at how government brings cases these days, particularly when they have this belief and nationwide campaign to get our supply of pain medication limited and undertreat patients, I would think that they have at the least exaggerated and overcharged and want to overpunish and want to put on a show for all those people that believe our national problem is about addiction instead of it's about pain and people living longer and suffering from pain more.
Yeah. When I started this organization 3 years ago, because I saw this 10 years ago, living in a hospital bed. I said, well, shit's about to get bad in this country over the next 5 years. I would hear the chatter amongst the doctors and the nurses, and I would see horrible things happen in a hospital bed. And I went on social media one day. I said, you know what, if I'm having these problems living with Crohn's disease, there's going to be about 20 other million people. And we started with 5 members. We have thousands across the country. One of our members, what's needed for a patient to get a lawyer on their own. In other words, if a patient, they go into their doctor's office, their pain management says, I can't treat you anymore. I've got to stop. With no rhyme or reason. John, can a person get a lawyer for that?
Well, it's kind of a nice question if a doctor is undertreating you and still treating you, as opposed to a doctor saying, I'm not taking any pain cases. And so undertreating is a violation of the oath and the standard of practice for a person that needs treatment. And what the government is doing is creating an epidemic of undertreatment. People and insurance companies are now folding as well. So there's a whole community of undertreatment going on. And so you could probably bring an action about undertreatment, but you'd need the ideal set of facts. The doctor who says, I'm not treating a pain case, is probably protected because there hasn't been a relationship or an obligation. But if you had a long history, say, with a physician, and all of a sudden he kept you as a patient and he undertreated you, I suppose you'd have an argument. So, but what you're going to see, I think, is the doctor is going to say, I'm not handling pain medication anymore. And I have had doctors tell me that that's what they're doing because of the government and DEA and local prosecutors as well. I have found that local prosecutors seem more intelligent sometimes about this than federal prosecutors.
Yeah, my sister-in-law was a prosecutor for the Medicare Fraud Division in Providence, and she said, I didn't know this was happening in our country because she had never been affected. And I have a saying, right. You're not affected until you're affected. And right. Everybody gets old, everybody gets injured, everybody gets sick. I've got, let's bring in caller 269. Hi, caller.
Jesse Ray or Jay Ray from Coleman, Michigan. I've got a question for John. Can you help educate us chronic pain patients on the definition of Medicare fraud that send these doctors to trial so we have a better understanding of it?
Well, a simple example of Medicare fraud would be I demand you submit to an expensive procedure that your symptoms don't justify and aren't required. And maybe I do this with a lot of patients a number of times. Then you have a foundation question whether or not the person is prescribing something so that they can be paid for it, as opposed to the patient actually needing it, or giving. Some doctors may be giving tests that are defensive in the present atmosphere of the government going after doctors. I think that would be a harder case to prosecute because they're doing this to prove that what they're doing is the right thing to do. So the kind of Medicare fraud would be another kind that's closer to the issue we've been mostly discussing is I give you 952 prescriptions over a period of time for a drug that your condition does not merit. And so then I have a twofer. If I'm the government prosecuting it, I have a case for fraud and I have a case for dealing rather than healing. I'm giving you a drug I'm prescribing a drug you don't need. So that would be the kind of example. And the fraud would be I'm charging you for the visit because the doctors are themselves not supplying whatever number of milligrams of oxycodone or hydrocodone or any of the various species of opioids that might be legitimate medication under the right circumstances.
John, another problem that's rampant in the community is, patients are left to choose between their benzodiazepam or their pain medication. And
right.
I think that's not only is that cruel, but I advocated for a lady this week, and I sat down with this vicious beast, this nurse practitioner, and I said, "Beast lady, this woman has been stable on both 12 years. She's not failed a urine screen, doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, proactive in her lifestyle, and now she's left with the choice." I said, "We choose to receive both." And you really get into this horrible situation with, and there's this hostility in the room. What are your feelings about having legislation passed about a co-prescribing law? I started to write one in Rhode Island because it's more of a problem in Rhode Island than not receiving pain medication, especially for the elderly. Their benzodiazepam that they've on for 30 years. How cruel, how inhumane. Can we get legislation?
Well, I mean, if there were legislation, it should be hands off by the government on legitimate prescription practices, whether it be benzodiazepine or, other kinds of medication. And that unless there's any reason why they can't be given together because the side effects are dangerous, and they're not, to my understanding, then those prescriptions should be allowed. And what you do is then, when you don't do that, not only are you undertreating people, but then they go off and self-medicate in various ways. And with regard to pain medication, you hear people, declaring themselves heroin addicts to get methadone that has no effect. It doesn't have the right effect for the pain that people suffer.
Okay, that brings me to a big question, John. A lot of these people, the doctor says, "I can't prescribe you pain medication, but I can give you a script for Suboxone." Is that legal?
Well, that sounds to me like a bad practice. And we have chaos because if you start with bad premises, for instance, whatever your profession is, you're not following what you should do because of the interference, in this case, of possible prosecution, then the patient is the one who's shortchanged. And the question is, do they have a cause of action against the doctor? And if the doctor is saying, "I'll give you this instead, are you okay with that?" Well, that consent is compromised by the fact that you've already been told that that's not the best medication, but this is the best path for the physician to avoid investigation and prosecution. So every one of these is not just a medical problem, it's an ethical choice that should be actionable as a matter of law. But how many patients are going to be able to prosecute Dr. A? And it's more likely then they're going to try to go to Dr. B. And as our discussion with another caller was about, then they're going to have to document why they're choosing a new doctor over the old one. And then that would probably intimidate the second doctor. And this is the nightmare from which pain patients cannot awake, because then they look like drug seekers. And then if they have to travel across 2 counties to find a doctor who may give them pain medication, and they up that doctor's numbers and the statewide toll of opioids that are dispensed, it just becomes one thing after another, becomes worse and worse, and it becomes a self-fulfilling case for the government. See, look at this. Look what they're doing. They're traveling here to get medication. That other doctor rightly cut them off. It makes the false case that the government is prosecuting nationwide. How do we correct that? We need a revolution in approach. And politicians find it's an easy shot. When I was a puppy prosecutor, we're going to prosecute all these drugs. Well, we apparently have lost the war, because it hasn't changed since I was a young prosecutor to now. We still have massive drug problems, and we're chasing doctors now and making occasionally high-profile drug cases instead of treating it as a national health emergency, which is what it is. And we can't get health insurance for people, and we can't get good standards for the government to leave off individual doctors and pain patients. It is a nightmare. It's nothing short of a nightmare, legally, ethically, medically.
We're going to take in a caller with area code 251. Hi, caller.
Hi, this is Beth Kenny. How are y'all?
Hi, Beth.
My doctor was raided in 2015, and the FBI said that they would give us our medical records back. Well, at the time, we received just a few sheets of paper about what we were taking at the time. And it's 4 years later. My doctor's been in prison for 2 years. And why I've called a law firm in Birmingham as directed. I think it was from the FBI office. It may have been from the prosecutor's office here in Mobile or DA or whatever. But how can they keep our medical records whenever we need them? I saw that doctor for 16 years, and he had diagnosed me with so many ailments and everything, and I'm a legitimate disabled American, and I need my records.
I agree with you. What state are you in?
Beth is in Alabama.
Alabama. Okay. Well, as backward as they may be on how to handle pain patients or doctors, the state has the right of patients to have their records. They're your records. They're not the doctor's records. And unfortunately, it sounds like you're going to have to get some lawyer to make a motion to get your records.
What kind of lawyer?
Is paramount. What
kind of a lawyer? When she Googles that, what type of lawyer is she looking for? Not a workers' comp.
Well, my recommendation is a former federal prosecutor or one hell of a great civil rights lawyer, and they're usually easy to find by their profiles in challenging cases in which they've pushed the law in the courtroom. And that's the kind of lawyer that I would recommend. I was a member of the board of directors of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers for 7 years, and I'm still a member of the organization. And I've appeared across the state in across the country rather, in different states. And I need a local lawyer to do that because I'm only admitted in 4 states in the East. And when I do that, I look up who are the members in NACDL in the city of choice that I have to go represent someone. And I just did that in Louisiana with a fellow I've known for many years, and we were on the board of directors of that organization. And he became my local counsel and moved my admission to appear. But if I was living in a jurisdiction and I wanted to know another lawyer to say, represent me, that's how I would choose the lawyer. I'd look at the lawyer who was NACDL, who lived in the area and I'd go and see him and see if we could work out an arrangement to represent me in the cause of action, and he would tell me whether or not we had a cause of action. In the case of a medical record, that is your medical record, and you have a right to it, and they can't withhold it from you, and they have to give it to you, or at least give you a copy of the thing if they're claiming it's some sort of evidence. And that's the problem with a lot of these cases, both for doctors and patients. Government seizes everything and then goes through it, thumbing through it, looking for things that allow them to prove misconduct by the doctor. In the meantime, patients' records are tied up, and when they were not digital, it was even worse, but it's still hard to get those records from the doctors, rather from the government when they have these seizures. But you have I assume you're saying the U.S. Attorney has the records and they're sitting in a file cabinet or a digital form in their office. And I would call up on my own and say, I want my record. And if they said no, then I'd walk across the street to the NACDL lawyer that presumably lives in your neighborhood and say, could you make a motion to get my medical records, and make them pay for it, make them pay the cost of hiring you, but you're going to have to pay up front for a real lawyer to do anything.
We're going to take in, and we've got a lot of callers. Just bear with us. We're going to try to get to everybody. We have a lot of questions coming in. Next caller, area code 508. Hi, caller.
Hi, Claudia. It's Ellie Diorsi from Bellingham, Mass.
Hi, Ellie.
I'm just calling, and hi, Mr. Flannery. I just have a quick question.
Okay.
I'm calling because I was on a specific medication for over a decade, and I went to my doctor and asked him to lower it. I was ready to. I wanted to taper it down myself. And what happened is because of the way the prescription drug monitoring program is written in Massachusetts,
right, I
literally had to file an appeal. Really? So I did that, and then when I lowered the dose again, I had to appeal 4 times. And it's because in the prescription drug monitoring program, it states that if there is a change in dose or quantity, the medication will be considered a new medication. But it just makes common sense if they put in there, unless it is a lower dose or quantity. So that didn't make any sense to me. But I won my appeal.
Good.
And I got a letter from the insurance company stating that they will cover that particular medication for my lifetime.
Okay. That sounds like a success story.
But it didn't. Sadly, the doctor who I was seeing for well over a decade left the practice, and he obviously got intimidated by the DEA or the Massachusetts Medical Board. But he is still working, but he does not prescribe pain medicine. He's doing all the injections. My question is, I can't find that letter, and I contacted my insurance company, and I asked them for a copy of that approval letter, just in case the new doctor who took me off at my first visit would ever change his mind. And they didn't give me that letter. They gave me the approval letter for the higher dose. And how do I get the insurance company to release that document to me just for my own?
Well, are you sure they have that document, number one? And then number two, if you've already done your due diligence and they aren't producing it to you now, you might have to go to court to compel them to produce it. You might have to hire a lawyer to do it.
I'm going to help Ellie out with that. She's right up the street. We're going to take in another caller, area code 406. Hi, caller. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hi.
Dr. Ibsen here. Thank you for being on, Mr. Flannery.
You bet.
I wanted to say something about the patient with records. If you have a prescription drug registry in your state, I don't understand where doctors can refuse to see a patient that doesn't have old records, because all of the records of medication use are already in the prescription drug registry and can be referred to readily by any physician in the state. So when patients became refugees in Montana and they came to me, all I had to do was look them up in the prescription drug registry and see that they were regularly prescribed from one doctor and did their best to use one pharmacy. So that doctor's records were unavailable because the DEA had seized them. But it seems like a perfect tool. In fact, one of the only useful tools for the prescription drug registry is if people could just look them up and see what patients are doing, and then resume their medications that their life depends upon. Any ideas about that? Whether a doctor who does that is allowed to do so?
Well, first of all, I defer to your expert opinion on the elements of your discussion. But the trouble is, and maybe they presume this, is if you go after them for ethical / malpractice, you have to, I think you'd have trouble getting a personal injury lawyer to take it, because it sounds more complex than what they normally do. And the recovery, if any, is a document or it's a specific performance. And then what damages you have are hard to estimate. They're unspecific. So you would think that you could trust upon the professionalism of lawyers, doctors, etc., but apparently you can't. And there's an expression in law school that where there's a wrong, there's a remedy. Well, in fact, in real life, you find just by living, whether you're a lawyer or not, that that's just not true. And legislatures, good-willed people, and they do exist, remedy these things. And sometimes the doctors or whoever the wrongdoers are do. But it's just not tolerable that a person's medical records, which are at the heart of literally their quality of life, if not their ability to live however many years they may on this planet. So that's the problem. There's a gap between the law and how things really happen. And it's gotten worse in recent years, as I said in response to an earlier caller.
I have a question now that Mark is with us as well. When I advocate for people and they tell me that their doctors dropped them, I said, well, we need to get a certified letter from your doctor stating the reason why. Is that within a patient's right to request a letter?
Well, did you say to request a law or to request a record?
I ask a doctor on behalf of my patient, just put it in
to
writing.
Certify?
Yeah, I just want a certified letter for this patient. So the next doctor, we can bring it to the next doctor so we don't look like we're doctor shopping.
Yes, I think you're entitled to do that, and or to say that if a doctor calls you, you're going to say that as well, because it's the truth. And early on, we talked about what happens when Dr. A decides it's too dangerous to actually prescribe, and that doctor no longer does prescribe pain medication, and for fear of going to the next doctor, that you will appear that way to a doctor that doesn't know your history. It seems to me it's of paramount importance that you be able to document it. As one of the fellows in my book, I think it's the second chapter, what he did was he carried around all his records to doctors to get the treatment he needed for his pain. Mm-hmm. And he couldn't sleep at night, and he couldn't stay awake during the day, and he had pain all the time. It was really terrible, and it just kept going. And I haven't talked to him in a while, but I have no reason to think it changed, because his condition was such that it was a physical condition. I don't think he could remedy that.
Very sad. We're going to take caller 6, area code 607. Hi, caller.
I got a question. George in New York. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, hi.
What should we be, if everything's going good for us and we have yet to be affected by this, what should we be doing?
I think you should go out and have a good pasta dinner and celebrate that. But it would be nice if you'd also talk in the community about this is how it should be for others. I mean, we need voices to say this is not right. And right now there's one loud scream across America, and it is that anybody who uses pain medication, and it'll go down to even taking in a leave, is somehow or other less in terms of their merit, their character for doing so. And that's unacceptable. Why do we have all this science to teach us how to have some lifestyle, and then we tell people that there's no way to use it? There is no way in the nation that put a man on the moon that we can figure out how to use medication in balance so that pain is taken care of and we deal with people that become addicted rather than dependent.
Yeah, we're in a real, I mean, this is a crisis. You know, I think we have an illicit fentanyl heroin overdosing epidemic. I catch a lot of slack, by the way, every time I say that. I try to stay away from pain medication. You know, I say educate, educate, educate. I must say that 10,000 times throughout the course of the day. How can we, you know, when people tell me I'm still getting what I need from my doctor, I put a letter in the mail on Don't Punish Pain Rally letterhead, and I say, we support you. What can we do to continue to support you? What can we do to protect our providers, John?
Well, silence doesn't work. You have to give voice to the injustice. You know, in my example today, I put up a notice on Facebook and Twitter that I was going to join you. And as a result, people that I had no idea had these pain problems and know me in a different context are telling me the terrible things that have happened in their family and so forth. And what you're doing with this show and the people who are calling in and those who talk to their friends and neighbors and doctors and ethical boards and go on campaigns and to illuminate the problem, that's what we have to do. And presidential candidates right down to the local town commissioner have to be told that you guys got it wrong. There's a local delegate I like in very many respects, and I've talked to him about this, and it's like, no, we had a problem in my family, and that's it. And he won't be persuaded no matter what, unless that issue becomes the issue for his election. And he has many other good qualities, but there's this blindness. And I mentioned Cory Booker, who made a point of it in the presidential debates. And otherwise, he seems to be an outstanding fellow. Has no one talked to him about the pain? Because he seems to be very bright. So why wouldn't he know about it? And I choose him only because he spoke about it. I don't know if I interviewed every person who's a candidate in either party that I wouldn't hear the same garbage, that this is only about addiction and this is only about death and it's not about pain. And the people who are involved, who are suffering from pain, there's so many more. And there's no way to do a triage of people who die. But you have to accept that we have two parallel tracks here, and these are two different kinds of problems, and we can only concentrate on one and ignore the other, namely the chronic pain, the acute pain people have, and the need they have for legitimate medication.
Mm-hmm. John, what I did 3 years ago, I took my local representative on my social media journey, and I said, you know, if you've been affected, post here. Well, that poor guy probably received 10,000 emails over the course of a year, but he was the first representative in our country to stand up and say, we need this bill that excludes people with chronic intractable pain from the guidelines, the regulations. And, you know, it took me about, I want to say maybe a year. It started off as some crappy resolution, which is useless, but it passed the House. And I tell people,
well, there's another legal amendment that we could use, and this is applied in every other criminal case. This nonsense that there's some norms of professional conduct that cannot be deviated from, that's nonsense. It should be that there was a specific intent to commit the crime of distributing drugs to someone that had no legitimate need for those drugs. It should be that. It shouldn't be this test of a doctor coming in who's an addictionologist saying that this doctor, well, I don't like the way he did this, and I don't like the way he did that, and he should have done this, and he should have done the other thing, but I can't say he had an intent to actually deal drugs. I can't say whether or not he was deceived. I can't say that the coincident death of a patient who took drugs that I never prescribed and got them from other people I should be held responsible for. You should have to prove I intended to hurt someone. I knew they were going to die. I did it for that reason. I mean, this is and then I put you away for life when you're 67 as a doctor. This is all wrong. This is crude. This is unfair. This is inappropriate. And the only people that are profiting from it are the people who use the stats to get more money for enforcement. Politicians get elected saying that they care about this stuff when they really don't because they're not doing the research. And that's the problem in America right now. We have too many people that are like walking zombies and don't care what the truth is as long as it works for them. That's not acceptable.
Peggy asked, well, Peggy, I think we know how. She said, how are they getting away with this? A person's asking, should a doctor just take a quick plea deal and get back to their life? I know in Rhode Island, I spoke with the doctor and he said, Claudia, it was easier for me to pay $30,000 instead of go through the hell of a trial. And God only knows where that would let me go. That's three questions in one. Well, I'm going to simplify this question, John, because now I sound like a litigator. If you're a doctor, you're being terrorized, and the DEA raids your office, should you be silent or should you be vocal? Should you call the media? Because we like to support these doctors with rallies. Silent, vocal.
Well, silence doesn't work. You can't win the argument you don't make. And you can't propitiate an evil God, and this is an evil God. They can't hear you. There's no empathy for the pain patient because the pain patient is defined in their system as the victim. There are even those that believe the fact that you have pain indicates that you don't have your life in order with your maker. In other words, there's some sin that if you remove that, you won't have the pain. I don't know where people get these crazy ideas, but they do. And we all know that this machine that we walk around in with our mind thinking, it breaks down. It gets compromised. It doesn't do what it used to do. That pain can run through your body like a storm. And whatever started it is hard to stop. And Dr. Fisher, who is one of the doctors that I spoke to, he had this theory that maybe in some cases, if you can titrate the pain medication enough, you might actually cure the pain that's kind of a storm inside your body. And he said he had some success with that. But he was also prosecuted. He managed to get the case, he managed to be acquitted of all the charges, to get the charges thrown out. Now, he went through hell for that. And he doesn't want to have anything to do with practicing pain medication anymore because I'm sure he's suffering from PTSD. The contradiction between what you're taught as a doctor and that they then treat you as a criminal, and the fact that you go through hell and at the end of it you're found to have not committed anything, but you still went through it. You can never recover from that kind of humiliation and suffering, no matter what they say at the end. They said this about Richard Pay in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we have Mark with us. Yeah. Mark, I know you've been through hell, and Mark fought that. He's been vocal, and Mark has 10,000 supporters daily. Mark, you're still there, I take it, right? You're still with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
And I know, Mark, I know you're back in the, in the trenches again, and we want to support Mark. We never want to be too vocal for doctors because we don't want to screw them over in their cases. So, Mark, what can you leave us with as a doctor? What are your thoughts on the issues right now today?
Well, it's heartbreaking, and it's interesting that people of prodigious talent and prodigious huge hearts can't get this communicated and get it resolved. But for me, it's clear that we have to be out loud, we have to be transparent, and we have to pull together. doctors, patients, people with addictions, other people that are being marginalized. Diabetics are being marginalized just because of the cost of medicine. It's all happening across the spectrum, and we have to unify in some way. The older people were disempowered until they formed AARP, and now they are a force to be reckoned with. And I think at some point we have to politically create something that will get the attention of the legislators and the prosecutors, frankly.
How can we, John, is there any way and this, I'm a lay person, but, in my mind, I think if we could organize 500 attorneys across the country, some solid legislators, and build up this a force to be reckoned with, like the LGBT community. There's 25, 30, 40 million people with pain. How can we build something involving lawyers and get the lawyers the funding, that a legal defense fund for doctors? How can we all come together, John?
Well, to choose LGBTQ as an example, they just celebrated 50 years since the riot down the Village, in which they were the object of scorn and slander and prosecution. And over those 50 years, there have been advances, and we still have people being killed for their dissonant affectional preferences by some people who just can't even tolerate difference. And here we have the government itself has got the megaphone in their hand and shouting to the world that pain medication is bad, period. That's it. And the message drowns out almost anybody else. And again, the current Vanity Fair article, about Pharma Purdue is very interesting, not so much because of Pharma Purdue, but how relentless they are in contradicting anything he says about at least the objective of the medication to help and save and protect people from pain. When you talk to, say, if you walked into any room of randomly selected people and there were 50 there, and you said, who here knows somebody that's suffering from pain and is grateful for pain medication, you would identify people. But everybody is in the closet, if you will, like LGBTQ was for an extended period of time, because to say it is to be an outcast. To say, yeah, I use pain medication, or my brother does, my mother, my sister, my cousin, whatever, my child maybe, who knows. So there's this scourge against anybody who would dare say that. And there's like a righteous charge against anyone. So what is the answer? The answer is people have to speak. They have to talk about it. They have to educate others. They have to tell the story. They have to say it to legislators, to judges. They have to get up at, master of ceremony practices and make it their topic, because that's the only way we're going to cure this. And the remedy for all the terrible things that have ever happened in government always come from the people educating everybody. Jefferson said, a nation that expects to be ignorant and free expects what never was and never will be. We have an ignorant nation on this issue. We have to educate it, and until it gets the message, we're going to have patients and doctors that are going to continue to suffer, even to die. And doctors are going to go to prison and jail just for doing what they were supposed to do, which is to heal.
Yeah, we go back to educate, spread the word. I have a doctor that's in some trouble right now in California, and she said, Claudia, I don't know if I should call the media. I don't want to, what if everything is dropped? I don't know whether I should move forward. And I said, girl, you need to be vocal, because something bad's going to happen to you. You're screwed either way. If I'm going to prison, I'm going with a microphone and I'm going to be screaming my case. But that's just me. Now, if a doctor wants to retain you, John, you said you were you practice. You have a license in 4 states to practice. Can you?
Right.
So if a doctor's in Florida, can they hire you? Walk me through the process.
Well, the way it works is that you can apply to appear in any court where you're not admitted for one or several cases on the application of a local attorney. And so I've appeared from Hawaii to the Virgin Islands in such cases. I've been doing this for more than 40 years. I'm admitted in New York, D.C., Virginia, and West Virginia. And I appear most frequently in those areas, but I appear where the case is, and I've done this for quite a number of years. So I have, someone writes me an email and wants to discuss the case, we can see if we can do something. JONFLAN@AOL.com. And now, having said that, I also think that there are really good lawyers across the country, so you don't have to bring me into your neighborhood if there isn't, if there is a local counsel. And I have found that I have practiced a way of fighting legitimately that improves situations. You can never predict what's going to happen in an individual case, but I do think that what we find among lawyers is the ones that prepare, no matter how comfortable they are speaking or how much law they know, if you actually prepare, study the facts and law in your case so that it's part of your corpuscular structure, you improve the chance of your client doing better. And I don't believe in being silent and hoping that something's going to happen. I believe you have to mix it up, get in yourself. And former prosecutors and real trial lawyers, I think, understand that.
So it would seem, if you're listening, if you're a pain patient, it looks like you're looking for a civil rights attorney. I know in Rhode Island we only have 3 here. And if you're a doctor who's listening, you're probably going to look for a criminal defense attorney, somebody like John. We're going to sneak in another caller here, area code 302. Hi, caller.
Hi. Can you hear me?
I can.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, somebody had brought this up, and I was just kind of curious if this is even legal. Life insurance companies are now accessing your prescription medication records and denying if you take pain medicine.
Wow. Well, that's terrible.
I don't have any right now.
Yeah, I think that's wrong. And I think it's
legal?
actionable. Yeah.
Actionable?
She wants to know.
Yeah, I think so.
Do we know if it's legal?
I said I don't believe it is.
Oh, okay.
No.
All right. Yeah, I mean, it's just...
To know what prescriptions you take is one thing. To deny you insurance because you do take pain medication is something else. Insurance is supposed to cover pain medication.
So, John, a person with pain has been attacked from too many angles to count. So we have these 2016 CDC guidelines that fuels the fire, even though this has been a long-standing problem. So first we go after the weakest link. So we go after the people with pain, the veterans, the elderly. It seems like and we ostracize, we stigmatize the people that are dependent, not addicted on pain medication. So we appear to be like lepers. So we're in a leper colony. And now we have the insurance companies, they jump on board. We're not going to pay for this person's medication. And then the government says, now for the attack, we're going to move in and we're going to go after the doctors who are prescribing. We're going to find out which doctor's prescribing 500 pills, which doctor's prescribing 20,000 pills. We're going to go after them. We're going to rip him apart and we're going to leave nothing but a heart. We're going to destroy his reputation. We're going to take away his assets. We're going to take away his home, his dog, his chickens. They seize everything a doctor owns. Was something just passed recently where the Department of Justice can no longer seize a doctor's everything?
Well, not that I've heard of. In fact, I've seen no diminution in the eagerness of the Justice Department to seize everything in sight. It's always a laundry issue of everything, and they take it, and then come talk to us afterwards. Make a motion to return something that we've taken. If you can get any judge to listen to you or any judge to return anything.
John,
we had one caller that told us that she can't even get her her own personal medical record as a result of a government seizure in Alabama. So we have one example in this conversation this evening. And I think that the offenses are as many as you can imagine, and the remedies are almost always going to require a lawyer and pushing it, and silence is, and just constantly asking them is not going to be enough. It's like they have to be compelled to do the right thing. That's a sad part of America these days. And because opioids are now in the political frame, all bets are off that people will do anything right. I mean, not only are the people who need pain medication and the doctors who give it in a list of untouchables, a person who comes forward and says, "Whoa, what are you doing?" becomes an untouchable by saying that, by association with those who are being compromised by an unnuanced policy that says anybody uses opioids is an addict, and we got to save them. We're here to save you.
Okay. So, John, what's your email? One more time.
Okay, it's Jon, even though my real name is John, Jon, F as in Frank, LAN at AOL.com.
And your website is?
www.johnpflannery.com, and that John is spelled John.
Okay. I'm not going to tell your mom that you messed with the spelling on your first name. You're safe there, John. So, John, you always have an invite to one of our rallies. We rally again on October 16. We invite doctors. It started off with 10 rallies, and I think we had 46 organized, and sometimes only a few people show up. Here's the good news. 3 years ago, I would beg media to show up. And now media calls frequently, even in the off protest season. So I always like to leave people on a good note. There's so much pain, there's horrors, there's so much sadness in this community. And I try to rally, we try to support one another. So I'm going to end this show the same way I end it, but I want to ask you one last question on a personal note. Tell me, what was Siobhan Reynolds like?
Oh, Siobhan was fabulous. Siobhan, I had written an op-ed which was about how we needed people to fight in court, and it goes back to advocacy. And I think it appeared in the Washington Post, and she was in New York, and she read the op-ed, and I was attacking prosecutors who hide the ball, overcharge, seek extra punishment, things like that. And Siobhan called me up and said, so was I prepared to put my body where my mouth was? In other words, did I really practice what I preached? And I said, yeah. So we talked, and we had some common interests. And she personally had problems with pain in her family. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the first things that she asked me to do was to handle the appeal of Richard Pay. And she had put blood, sweat, and tears into trying to help him. And he's a very engaging fellow and so forth. And I did manage to get him full clemency. And the interesting thing about it was I made the argument to the governor, and they only were going to allow me 5 minutes. But when I finished 5 minutes, I said to him, can I have more time? And he said, you can have as much time as you want, Mr. Flannery. And Richard's wife was there with me. And everybody in the place cheered when he did that. All these other people were there making clemency petitions, but they took us first. And his wife said, I feel like I'm in a Rocky movie. So Siobhan worked on that case and other cases, and we did a lot of good together. And it was a real shame that she died in that airplane crash. Yeah. And I think that the pain community lost an outstanding advocate for doctors and patients, and she was of undying energy in that cause, and we talked about it a fair amount. She dedicated her life to it, and the fellow that was in the plane, it was the pilot when they crashed, was himself a lawyer who had been involved in litigation on behalf of a doctor. And the two of them were under investigation for the government for having the nerve to be so strong in their advocacy. So Siobhan was a great lady, and it's a great loss, but she had a great smile and a great spirit, and she should be remembered for all that she accomplished.
Yeah, she's a hero in the community. I wish, so John, I wish we could clone you and Dr. Ibsen and Dr. Feldman. God knows we could always use a few million Dr. Feldmans around the country. John, thank you so much.
Right, he's a tireless advocate.
Yeah,
Arnold's a tireless advocate, yeah.
That's my only second Jewish husband. I speak with him. I'm surprised he didn't call in. And he has these amazing ideas, and he calls at the craziest times. But we love you, Dr. Feldman, if you're listening. John, I can't thank you enough for joining us. Hey, everybody.
No, thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. We did go about 30 minutes over time. So a big thank you to Brian and Janelle for letting us stream 30 minutes longer. We protest again on October 16. I always get emotional when I say this. I get my strength from your strength. Hang in.
Thanks for joining us for the DPP Rally Talk Show. Subscribe to our channel at DPP Rally Talk Show with Claudia on YouTube. Copyright 2019. All rights reserved.